evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for joining us. Everyone here at the Centro and everyone out there in virtual land. Thank you so much for joining us this evening here at the Achucha Centro Cultural in Silmar, California. Um, my special guest, my name is Jose Maldonado. I'm professor of Chicano Studies and History at Los Angeles Mission College right here in Silmar. And I think I'm going to take this off because it's hard to breathe and talk at the same time with it on. So we've got this special event today with our special guest, world-renowned Matt Sedillo. And let me just read to you a little bit of the things people have said about Matt. If you're not familiar with his work, you will be after today. So Matt Sedillo brings poetic fire to the burn through the issues: avarice, mediocrity, lies, gentrification, labor, loneliness, class conflict, and others. Most officially sanctioned poets ignore in the name of the ice-cold fakery that calls itself poetry in the United States. Thankfully, Sedillo burns down the house built out of the illusion of democracy of the literary. In this sense, he brings necessary fire. And that's Roberto Lobato, the author of Unforgetting, a memoir of family, migration, gangs, and revolution in the Americas. Another one. Sedillo is the Carlos, the Jackal of poetry. That's Gio Maher, author of A World Without Police. Matt Sedillo is a poet during times of unveiling, when the source of what makes this country and world tick and fall apart becomes revealed to millions. That's Tiachucha's very own founder, Luis Javier Rodriguez. And then there's, I studied with Ginsberg, I drank with Bukowski, and now I've met the new master. Run and hide, white boy. Sedillo writes with a switchblade, the best political poet alive. And everything is political. And that's Greg Palast, the author of, well, a bunch of books, but he's a very well-known journalist and author, and he's done a lot of political exposés on, so many different topics, going back at least 20 years since I've been familiar with his work. But on that note, I wanted to just go ahead and introduce you to Matt Sedillo right here. He's got a new book. It's called City on the Second Floor. His first book was, is this your first book? Mowing Leaves of Grass, the first book published. Mowing Leaves of Grass came out in 2018?
2019.
2019, and ever since then it's been taught in countries all over the world, and universities all over the world. I picked it up. I first met Matt about 6 or 7 years ago, and he came and he's been supporting Mission College and Chicano Studies and Mecha ever since. Comes to all of our events whenever we ask him to, and so I was honored when he invited me to come and share this space and time with him. So we're going to be talking about this particular book today, which is available here at the Achuchas. And I've asked him to read a few of the book poems from this book, and then we can talk about them after he reads them. So, first one is LA is full of pigs.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you everyone for coming, and So before I read LA is full of pigs, I just want to talk a little bit about kind of what motivated that particular poem, because LA is full of pigs definitely. It's an older poem. It's the oldest poem in the book, but it's a poem that much of the rest of the book is kind of patterned off of. So I wrote it when I was when I just quit my last retail job, and it was the worst retail job I ever had. And I remember being yelled at and screamed at. I remember thinking, like, you know what? I'm a human being. I don't take, I could feel the pride in my stomach well up through my arms and reach my hands. I pulled off my name badge and like, I'm a human being. Damn it, I quit. And they said, no, you don't. Pin it back on me. I was there for another 6 months. I had pride and dignity. I had a car bill. I had a little fridge full of Amstel Light or whatever I was drinking at the time. So I was able to quit later, and I started getting real sick. And I got chronic bronchitis. I know what it was. And at the time, poets didn't have health care. And so I got really sick, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to lose my apartment. I'm going to lose my health. I'm going to end up on the streets. I'm going to have to deal with the cops. So that kind of thought process led to writing LA's Full of Pigs. Los Angeles falling apart. In the streets, in the suburbs, in the wind. In a barely kept Hollywood bathroom, wheezing, vomiting, coughing up blood. These past few days, these past few years, I have spread myself across this sprawl, and now fear this drive may kill me, may kill us all. And I wander over a general hospital between whose walls desperation wears in high concentration, upon the faces of the shopworn and prematurely ill alike, as they wait upon the news of illness they cannot afford to have, survival without insurance. This may take a while. Los Angeles is full of untold misery. A homeless man sleeps next to me, and I can smell the years of hard distance between who he is now and who he may have been. And all that stands between him and the bitter wind is chance, is the kindness of a night nurse who will let him sleep in peace. Los Angeles is full of good people who from time to time can turn a blind eye to killer policy, and I wonder how our bounce checks, free clinics, carry cash and leave a count in the negative stamp to me and him, me and the bitter wind. And if so, where would I go? From Venice to San Francisco is our war on the homeless, a war on the dispossessed. They got fewer and fewer options. They got shelters for women and children, all inadequate. For me, just man up, homeboy, to that concrete pillow, to that cardboard blanket, and freeze yourself to death. This city will leave to die on the same stretch of sidewalk where banks stretch into the sky. And I wonder, as even now Skid Row is being gentrified as a city, as a system, as the pigs which will pass poverty, past hunger, past homelessness, the very edge of existence on Skid Row, where all so-called complexities in economy are laid bare, where the rich are literally stacked upon the poor. Los Angeles is full of grotesque absurdity, especially on Skid Row, with millions annually policing the misery of people with nowhere to go because your pockets are empty and you ain't got nothing, and change is not coming. Well, there's no real difference between a booming metropolis and a barren desert where the money passes by you, passes through you, as though you, which is part of the scenery, protected in the knowledge they are serviced by pigs who speak the language of violence, the language of the nightstick, the language of untold misery. They'll beat you for begging, beat you for sleeping, beat you for breathing, beat you for doing whatever it is you need to do to survive the night in the bitter wind. Los Angeles. I said Los Angeles. It's full of pigs.
Los Angeles is full of pigs. I mean, there's so much packed into this poem, right? Dealing with, just how so many people really are living on the edge, really living just a paycheck away from that. Fortunately, I've never experienced homelessness, but personally, right? But we walk around and we drive around, and we experience it secondhand because it's everywhere now. I mean, what we see nowadays is nothing like I've ever seen before. Every corner, every city. You go up Sacramento, go to San Francisco. It's getting worse and worse all the time. At the same time, there's houses being built left and right. That stand completely empty. And we look at the price of houses right now; they're skyrocketing. And we wonder what kind of how is this possible, right? How is this possible to have this kind of a situation? Where you talk about survival without insurance, right? Prematurely ill alike as they await upon news of illness they cannot afford to have. I mean, that's pretty profound. I mean, I remember before I got a job, I had just gotten out of graduate school, and I ended up getting sick, very, very, very sick. I ended up at Olive View Hospital over here. And I could swear they experimented on me, I still have a scar going from ear to ear. So it's pretty frightening, the idea of being in that situation. But we have literally millions of people, right, in that situation.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so much of that poem was written about just like the idea that, just like what you're talking about with there's some homelessness, and at the same time there's like more empty housing units than homeless. I remember reading years ago, I don't know what the statistics are now, but I remember reading that there was something like approximately like 6 million homeless and 18 million empty housing units, like without even having to build anything new. They're like empty housing units. Not even like, oh wow, look at that skyscraper. People could just sleep in the cubicles or something like that. No, forget even that. And just literally literal like empty housing units. And in the poem I talked about from Venice to San Francisco, because at the time when I wrote it, I remember there was all these like these apartments out in Venice that they were gonna like remodel or something, and they were like under like armed guard to prevent like homeless people from or to prevent anybody from going and sleeping there. They were like, they literally like, you know, they're there with like a armed police force to prevent that. And I remember also like in Ontario at the runtime I wrote that as well. In Ontario there was a homeless encampment, and they had people who were wearing different colored bracelets based on where they lived. So if you lived in San Bernardino County, you got the one color bracelet. If you lived in actual Ontario, you got one color bracelet. And if you were like from LA County or Orange County, you got a different color bracelet, you know. And so it was really just a really, at the time I wrote the poem, these problems really beginning to expand much more than it had been in recent years, and it's only gotten worse since then.
And let me see another piece right here that kind of stood out to me.
And the title, actually, I came up with the title though when I was in San Francisco, because I noticed there were less cops. Not that they were any less brutal, but there was less of them. But it was weird because at the time they didn't have nightsticks. The San Francisco PD, they had like these palos. They looked like piñata sticks. They were just like these straight up like just like a piñata like stick. It's like you know, like a wooden thing with a little black handle, like a little painted black handle, and like a stick baller.
Billy Clubs.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I was like, right. I expect a Billy Club. Got some professionalism here. You know, like standard is that's a palo, man. You can't hit me with a stick. What the?
Insulted. You're hitting me with a broomstick.
Exactly. Yeah.
At least do it right. Man.
Yeah.
And that's part of like I guess
together.
this next part right here. You know, Los Angeles is full of grotesque absurdity, especially on Skid Row, where they spend millions annually policing the misery of people with nowhere to go.
Right.
Right. And then that other part, on the same stretch of sidewalk where banks stretch into the sky.
Yeah.
You know.
So downtown LA. I mean, that's how disgusting it is. I mean, these are major corporations, but they're banks. I mean, the tallest buildings in downtown Los Angeles are banks. The USA Bank, the Paul something or other. There's the Bank of America. I mean, so there's a bunch of like, you know, but the tallest skyscrapers in LA are banks. So, and then you just overlooking, you know, the largest homeless population in the country.
Yep. Yep.
Horrible.
And if you ever go to downtown, you'll see it. I mean, it's like a stark contrast. I mean, like this contrast. I mean, that it's hard to not to be impacted by it, you know, that reality. And then just this idea that they spend so much money policing the homeless on this, that instead of, you know, and that's part of the whole defund the police or whatever you think about the terminology. That's part of that movement, right? The rationale is this idea that they shouldn't be handing this type of situation to police, right? There's something completely different going on here. Being homeless is not a crime, right? So there's got to be a different way to handle it. Okay, let's see if we can talk about the title poem, City on the Second Floor.
This one I don't actually have completely memorized. City on the Second Floor. So this title came from the Hotel Bonaventure. So I noticed that there was bridges that connected all the payments. So, and that's all throughout downtown LA. Bridges that connect buildings, so you don't have to walk on the street. There is a city on the second floor, international destination whose entrance is prohibited to all those appearing too poor for travel, where commerce crosses bridges of wire and concrete just above streetlight, rises in economy of scale, where buildings and offices connect to disconnect from the world below. Here, in the space between worker and destination, conversation spins profit, and no one moves without reason, and no one speaks without purpose. Here, the word is stillborn a commodity, and the world dies anew. While working stiffs spend wages in cheap imitation of their own exploitation, arrogant, delusional, walking dead, laughingly dreaming of a penthouse suite they will never reach, while staring down from terraces towards the street below.
So the city on the second floor. That caught my attention right away, right? The title of the book. And I was wondering, what is he talking about? It's like, kept reading that over and over again, over and over again. I said, well, yeah, that looks obviously, the posh and well-to-do up here. I started imagining like those movies that have come out recently, or over the last 10, 20 years, these dystopia films where the rich live somewhere else, right, and all the poor people are living, in misery and in just a huge barrio or ghetto somewhere,
Yeah.
and then I started thinking about that first poem, right, talking about homelessness. Well, that's exactly what they're trying to get away from, right? Trying to get away from all the ugliness that is on the first floor.
Right.
Because that's what I was thinking. Well, what's on the first floor? Right? What's on the first floor, right? So, in cheap imitation of their exploitation, right? While working stiff spend wages in cheap. That's us, by the way.
Yeah.
Delusional Walking Dead, laughingly dreaming of a penthouse suite they will never reach, right? While staring down from terraces towards the street below, right? I mean, that's pretty profound, and it kind of reminds me of just so many political struggles in general, right? My graduate work was on Latin American history, and one of the things that you see over and over again is how the middle class always sides with the upper class in struggles up and down Latin America, right? And this is kind of those on the bottom always want to be in the middle or at the top, right? And we rather than uniting across, the lines of solidarity, we want to try to reach that. So that's kind of like one of the things that stuck out to me in this poem.
Yeah. Well, so this book is full of just like this book is full of like really high and really low, right? So incredible wealth, and there's a lot of stories from like billionaires' perspectives and from lessons, and then it's also the bottom. The bottom. When you fall. I mean, it's the bottom side. It sounds like you're talking about a person. I'm not talking about any individual. I'm talking about what happens when any individual can fall. Can fall out of the routines and structures and safeties and precautions they have in their little bumpers on their little cars they drive through life, right? Because this could be any of us. I mean, any of us can. We're all like a few bad days away from just being just totally in a desperate situation. So it does talk about like being in those positions of complete desperation, and in being in those positions of complete power and complete wealth and exploitation, and being the recipient on the other side of it. But the title itself and that poem is about being in between there, and about the illusions that you bear being in there. And so there's a lot of this book is about those illusions, as well as the desperation of one side of it, and the absolute just evil on the other side, of the absolute evil of the wealthy, of the truly wealthy, not like your orthodontist uncle or something like this. I mean, like the truly wealthy. But your orthodox uncle is probably the one that I'm talking about with the city on the second floor. Thinking about a penthouse suite.
Yeah. So which leads me to this next one, right? Hammurabi.
Okay.
How many of you know the Code of Hammurabi? A couple of people.
Alright, so here we go. I grew up on television, so did my parents. I Love Lucy, lied and sweetly. America's River Redhead, desire suppressed in separate beds. Censors, rest assured, everything in good taste, everything in its proper place. Every traumatic episode ends with the threat of Ricky's hand never far from Lucy's face, beaming in glorious black and white. Wrong and right, plotline shade out the grain. John Wayne, shining silver city on a hill of guns and butter, where every schoolchild's desk doubles as bomb shelter, praying to the altar in question. So, pledge your allegiance. Seal your documents and lock and load your freedom, because it is not free. Now fall to your knees and praise be to the only God in which we trust. The atom, the Manhattan, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, the nuclear family, nuclear testing, the nuclear age gave way to nuclear waste. That's me. See, I grew up in the 80s. Morning in America. Ronald Reagan and Mr. Belvedere fresh in my doors, telling me life was more than mere survival, that I may live the good life yet. When my time came, Homer Simpson, Peter Griffin, and Al Bundy were all lying in wait, trying to convince me that I could raise a family in a two-story on the single income of a shoe salesman. They lied, and I cried. Not for my selfless oncoming generation of iPad kids on Hulu and Netflix where you pick your poison, but it rots your mind. Just saying, see them at cafes and sipping, job seeking, asking the net for deeper meaning. Who am I? Where do I belong? What use can I be in days such as these? Kids born of go-go gadgets, wires, and networks directed to latest trends, surf the web in search of themselves, no different. For me, will search away the bells of the Catholic Church, place in Holy Writ, Holy Script, Holy this, since the golden rule of pharaohs and Caesars, Romulus and Remus, Akbar and Alexander, Xerxes and Hammurabi, since the days of scribes and the books of kings, since they from on high convinced us down below that we ever needed their code of law to tell us we were free.
I love Lucy. Wow, this is just starting off really good right there, right?
Yeah.
And just the whole picture of because I just recently read something about how she had, when she started her career, she was actually in doing adult, uh, 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 um, not film, but just like uh, 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 photographs, not necessarily nude, but very sexy type of stuff. Um, but then you see the show, and it's completely, very sterile, right? I mean, like you said, they sleep in separate beds, but at the same time, he's always ready to smack her,
Yeah.
And that's not only that; it's the honeymooners, right?
Honeymooners, yeah, even worse, yeah.
It's even worse. So that whole domestic violence, it kind of gets normalized in a sense. In this is the kind of like a golden age of U.S. Television sitcoms. Back in the '50s when everything was the age of consensus is what I remember a book that I read called the 1950s when everybody's at least the image projected around the world is everybody's happy, right? We have suburbs, all these clean, white picket fences, two-car garage, dog named Spot, and all this other stuff, But at the same time, you have the civil rights movement, right? That's kind of like blowing holes in that image that is being promoted around the world. But even probably to this day, you go around the world, and a lot of people's image of what the United States is white America. So that's kind of interesting, and the way that these old sitcoms kind of like normalize that image. And another thing that kind of like shocked me right here, threw me for a loop, and back to elementary school was that how desks doubled for bomb shelters.
Yeah.
Did any of you ever have to do that, right? Stop, drop, and roll, or whatever. No, that's for
fires.
when you're on fire, right? But you get under the desk, right?
Duck and cover. It was called duck and cover.
Duck and cover, right?
Yeah. I was like, I'm I guess what they call an ex-millennial, so I kind of like the tail end of that when they were like, oh yeah, let's duck under these desks in case there's nuclear. So I'm like,
In case there's a
can
nuclear
vaguely
attack,
remember
right?
that, It's like a 4-year-old learning in preschool, like, oh okay.
I mean, I remember we used to, as kids, we used to say, tuck your, what say, grab your knees and kiss your butt goodbye. 'Cause you're not going to survive that.
Yeah.
Nuclear waste, nuclear testing. One of the things that I remember when I first started getting involved politically was I started actually with the environmental movement, and nuclear energy was one of the big things. This is like the 80s, and as I got more and more involved, another thing that I realized is that this whole nuclear cycle begins and ends on Indian reservations.
Yeah.
They go in there and they mine the uranium. They divide the native peoples against each other, and create all kinds of havoc, and they leave all the pollution behind that the extraction process creates. And then at the end, they go and dump the nuclear waste on the same reservation. So that was
Yeah, for a while there was the bombing of the Vieques.
Vieques, Puerto Rico, and Osaka, right, Japan. Is it Osaka where they do all those? The Navy yard, the Navy has all those practice runs, dropping payloads there. Morning in America, Ronald Reagan. That whole way that you use pop culture
Right.
to demonstrate, the like the lies, like when you call them
Yeah.
lies, they lied to us, right?
Right.
Homer Simpson, really, or Al Bundy, especially, is the one that
Homer Simpson.
the
Peter Griffin, Al Bundy,
image
yeah.
that comes to mind. Because I mean, Homer Simpson, he works at a nuclear power plant. Maybe they get
Yeah.
a little bit more money. Maybe they're unionized. Who knows, right? But Al Bundy, really, that's a true salesman. Has a 2-story house and he's raising a family,
Yeah.
in suburbia. I don't know.
In the
what
suburbs
city.
of Chicago.
Mhm.
That's not. I mean, that sounds pretty. I mean, it's not expensive as LA, but.
Yeah,
that
I don't know
sound-
what
that
city in the
sound
United
like-
States you can do that.
Yeah,
Even back then, when
yeah. But yeah, so the poem is written in kind of a 3-act structure. So the first part is talking about my parents. That's why it's got like I Love Lucy and John Wayne and that whole time period. And the next part is talking about Al Bundy and all this. But it's talking about the decline, So and this is like the 50s is like the high point or an economic high point, anyways. A lot of horrible things happening, but it's a time of more economic stability.
right.
For people. And then 80s is when things really began to collapse. I mean, that's when you really see deindustrialization, things like that. And so I'm born into this world where everything's falling apart, and all these things that, as evil as they may have been, and even and participating in it. I mean, the evil that we guess we're participating in, because the wealth of America is born of global imperialism, and even imperialism within the United States. Like we talk about the wealth of oil companies, right, extracting from like reservations like that. But so all this kind of like ill-gotten wealth that in a way trickles down, I guess, to the workers, even as we were being exploited. That was kind of like the world of the 50s, and in the world of the 80s, now you see the decline of that. You see the closing of factories. You see the end of what was called the industrial economy. And I remember when I was a kid, I was told I had to prepare for the service economy, right? And that was what I was told. And then midway through my time as a worker, I'm told the service economy is over. Now you gotta get ready for the gig economy, And I think we're told now the gig economy is ending. You gotta get ready for the scrounge economy. Develop an app economy. I don't know what economy is supposed to come next, but
it's gonna come next.
The tweet economy.
Can't
Elon
even buy
Musk is gonna save us,
cryptocurrency
right?
now.
The crypto economy. Oh yeah.
Apparently that's not even an option anymore. Yeah, I mean, there's this. Because in the 50s, although the image that was projected was all the stability, and partly it was because of how the United States came out on top after World War II, right? And they financed the reconstruction of Europe and all these other things, right? And they took control of the Middle East oil. That was the number one thing, right? Being able to control the flow of energy in the world. I mean, they started building freeways, right? They started building suburbs, and people started moving out of the inner cities, and that's how the inner cities ended up ghettoized and compartmentalized like that. And these neighborhoods started right here. What was Pacoima and Silmar, Sacramento before, back in the 50s? It was agricultural still, right? It was being transformed into suburbia, right? And this was all fueled by oil, right? And that they had the Red Line in downtown. That was one of the best public transportations at the time. And big oil and all the auto industry, they basically,
So how I found out about what you're talking about? How I first learned about what you're talking about? Read later more. So
Jessica Rabbit?
Who Framed Roger Rabbit? I'm not joking. That's how I first learned about the trolley system and the freeway system. Kind of like destroying that whole public service, that public transportation, anyways.
Yeah.
That's
I was surprised when I saw that movie.
I learned about Mulholland and all this stuff like from watching Chinatown.
Mm-hmm.
And I learned about a lot of things from LA Confidential. I mean, so you watch like Who Framed Roger Rabbit, LA Confidential, Chinatown. I mean, this history is like so hidden from us, and it's not part of our everyday. We learn about, like, we were kids. We learned about Paul Revere. We learned about just this
over and over again every year. You learn about the same.
Yeah, things that happen like 1600s in like Boston that don't have any. I mean they have a tangential effect, I suppose, but they don't really have a real effect on the way that we live in the cities we live in. So So yeah, so I mean that's
And you get little snippets like that, little hints in these movies. So somebody knows about this stuff, right?
Yeah.
Somebody knows, and it's just hasn't been a part of the regular what we learn, regular.
I mean, overall, I mean, we get this kind of like, I guess, the popular term right now is settler colonial. We get the settler colonial view of history of this area that begins with the arrival of these murderous Europeans, and that's how we kind of like we start. But so that's the big picture, right?
Mm-hmm.
But even the smaller picture of that, we have this thing where even living here, we're still very much like an intellectual colony of the Northeast. Like we're learning about these things in Boston and Washington and New York that really don't have that much effect on the way we live, and we don't actually understand the things that have happened here that affect the daily lives of people here
Directly.
like directly. So we don't like when there's a protest, there's a war, we're gonna all gather at Pershing Square. When there's some type of strike, we're gonna gather up at Pershing Square. We don't even know to be offended by the fact that we don't even know offended by the fact that there's a area that we all gather in called Pershing Square. So we don't even because we don't know who John Pershing is.
Pershing, right?
I mean, like so that's so for those watching don't know, John Pershing was a general who led what was called the Mexican expedition, or sometimes known as the punitive expedition, into Mexico to hunt down Pancho Villa. But he really ended up killing just random people, and that's someone that is honored in many different places all throughout Los Angeles and all throughout the country. And his crimes are numerous. I mean, it's not just that. And he also was leading in the Spanish-American War in the Philippines, so he's killing a lot of Filipinos. He also killed a lot of native tribes up in the what part? I guess the plains, that area would be called.
The Midwest.
Yeah, not quite the Midwest, like a little below that, like Idaho and that. I think it was, but so he has histories of that of what are called the Indian Wars, and he participated in a lot of those. So this guy is a really brutal, brutal character in U.S. history. And here we have a city that's full of Mexicanos, and it's got a very significant Filipino population as well. And here we are like celebrating, John Pershing. This is ridiculous. But we don't even know that's not maybe something to do, right? Remember when I was passing we used to drink. I'm sober now, but I used to drink at a place called Lucky Baldwin's, right? And I didn't even know that that's offensive. I had no idea who Elias Baldwin was. And Elias Baldwin was this land speculator that stole all this land from Mexico, and maybe he got very, very rich, and he's the founder of the Santa Anita racetracks. But these are things we don't even know because we're too busy learning about Paul Revere. We're too busy learning about things that happened on the other side of the country. So I think that that's why the ethnic studies struggle is so important, because we need to learn about the history of the place where we're at, and that does mean the original peoples that were here, and that does mean all that, but it also means the things that are affecting everyday life in a city that increasingly, if we're talking about the city of Los Angeles, is increasingly full of raza, is increasingly full of our people here, and we need to know why it is that we find ourselves at the bottom of an economic ladder. We need to know why it is we find ourselves in prison. We need to know why it is we find ourselves with the worst jobs, with the worst pay, where we find ourselves in essentially the workhorse of the American economy. Because it didn't just happen.
Right.
That didn't just happen. That happened because of the results of the wars and battles and things that happened here, and because of the ideas that happened here, and the realities that in the areas that were once Mexico was the area where people who were Mexicans and then all of a sudden were Americans got lynched and got dispossessed, and the laws that were created here. Do you know what I'm saying? Like we don't know anything about that. Like so much, and it affects the whole country. So much like of California law, of the original California law, of like the Greaser Act, of the foreign miners tax. All those laws are the blueprint for Jim Crow. And we don't know that. We don't know that because what's going on in the South at the time of the 1840s, 1850s? There's still slavery. So I mean, it's not until they're out that these California laws are the basis. These are what the vagrancy laws and the black codes down there are based on this. But we don't even know that because we don't think that it's important. We think that history moves east to west.
Yeah. Well, even among people who think they know history, they assume that things such as the Los Angeles was founded by Spaniards and things like that. The reality was it was founded by the castas, there were mulattoes and mestizos that came and established the city of Los Angeles. But it was founded on Tongva lands, right? It was founded on indigenous lands, where we're standing right here, right? Is indigenous lands, right? Pacoima, and so many of the names that still, are part of the landscape here are from the indigenous languages, right? And that's something that over the years, progressive groups and organizations have begun to recognize that, right? And you see it now just about everywhere, the so-called land recognition. That, at the very least, people are acknowledging that something happened here, right? That needs to be acknowledged, and that these are unceded, which is important, unceded lands, right, by the native peoples. There was no signing of any treaty. There was nothing like that, right? And so that's something and going back to this idea that we don't know all these things. One of the first times that really hit me, right, was going back 30 years when we were doing all this anti-quincentenary, Columbus quincentenary work, right? They were trying to celebrate the 500th anniversary of Columbus. And so we were mobilizing. There was a lot of Chicano native groups that were mobilized trying to stop that, trying to present a different story. And right in the middle of that, the I-10 freeway got named, what was an I-10 freeway? Anybody know? Intercontinental Columbus, Christopher Columbus Transcontinental Highway.
Yeah.
Right? It's like they're literally just slapping us in the face, right? And then this one right here, the 118 freeway, what's it named? Ronald Reagan Freeway, right? This is right when we're beginning to see the effects of all of Reagan's policies, especially in Central America, right? They named this. It's like, it's in your face. We don't give a damn, We're gonna name these are our heroes, and we don't care if they're your heroes or not, right? That's why the struggle to get rid of so many of these symbols, monuments from the South or Junipero Serras, statues and things like that, that was a culmination of decades of work and struggle, right? To finally have the country recognize that these people aren't holy people, saints, and untouchable. They have some very serious issues, and there's a lot of people in this country, probably the vast majority of people in this country, have issues with what these people stood for, right? And so it became a critical mass type movement that brought down, and it wasn't just here in the United States. It happened all across Latin America, right? At least, I don't know if about Europe, but definitely throughout Latin America, there was toppling all kinds of colonizer statues and things like that.
Yeah.
So.
People get really, people get, I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, it's outrageous. I mean, I remember, I think it was at the University of Florida, 2016, 2017, and they have this thing called the Freedom Walk there on campus. I mean, this is just to go to how people, and I was walking with the professor had never even seen this, because, they just go in, they go to the office, they go walk around. So we go to this Freedom Walk, and Freedom Walk has all these quotes, right? So there's quotes from Woodrow Wilson, there's quotes from Andrew Jackson, there's quotes from a few other people, but it culminates in the final one by Robert E. Lee. And so this is the Freedom Walk, and it ends with Robert E. Lee. This is amazing. This is outrageous. This is 2017, and this is at the University of Florida in Gainesville. They got a great oral history program. That's who brought me out, the oral history program. Wonderful teachers there. They have wonderful programs, but right there in the middle of the campus.
They didn't even know. Professor didn't even know.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a problem with the fact that our college is called LA Mission College,
I mean, yeah, there you go. I didn't even think about that shit. You don't think about things. When Colin Kaepernick was doing all that he was doing, that's a great thing, right? But the team he played for was the San Francisco 49ers. I mean, it's the ubiquity of just murder in this country that we don't even think to say
of that.
Yeah. So I mean, for those of the 49ers, well, who are the 49ers? I mean, who are these people? I mean, that's why this book's called Mowing Leaves of Grass. It was called Mowing Leaves of Grass because Walt Whitman was a big advocate of the Mexican-American War. But not only that, in his own poetry, he wrote a poem called Ode to California. And he writes an Ode to California. California, I will teach you this robust American love. And he's writing this in the 1850s. So what's going on in the state of California in the 1850s? All the things we listed before. The gold rush, foreign miners tax. Greaser Act.
all of the attacks against the native populations that happened.
Yeah.
I mean, they were driven to extinction practically up and down the state.
Yeah.
There were campaigns of extermination against. They called them diggers, right? And these are a lot of the indigenous populations in California. When the Spaniards first came, those that could, they went and escaped up into the mountains, right? Unfortunately, that's where the gold was found, right? So they didn't escape the genocide for long, you know, and it was literally it was a genocide, you know, and we exalt that, you know.
And we exalt Walt Whitman.
Mm-hmm.
So what does this mean? What is Walt Whitman's robust American love? What is he talking about? What is he talking about?
Yeah, the violence, right?
Violence and
the
genocide,
white
bloodshed.
man's burden, right?
Yeah.
Isn't he the one that coined that phrase?
No, that was Rudyard Kipling,
Much quickly.
and he actually coined that in advocacy of the United States to invade the Philippines. He wrote White Man's Burden. He called Filipinos half devil, half child. And there's another person that's lauded and celebrated, Rudyard Kipling. People got mad about mowing these grass. I said, I'll call my next one the White Man's a Burden. What do you think about that?
And I will sign it to my classes.
Well, there you go. Well, now I have incentive to write the White Man's a Burden. You heard it here.
All right, let's get to Ronald Reagan's Cold Dead Hands.
Ronald Reagan's Cold Dead Hands. All right. It's a deep cut. They close down schools and build more prisons. They close down schools and build more prisons. They close down schools and build more prisons, and then they find ways to fill them. Been that way since boarding natives, Mexican schools, and the white architects of a black education. I'm writing this mid-global pandemic when the rich get rich and the poor get sick. 7 generations in the 20th year of the 21st century, 2020 shit. Visions of deep shit. I'm writing this rapidly approaching the 11th administration of Ronald Reagan. When the rich get rich, offshoring bailouts, derivatives, government money to space race, and the rest get debt, homelessness, and mass incarceration. Then told not to ask why they close down schools and build more prisons. I hope this finds you in better times.
In my contemporary issues class, one of the things that I guess is a big part of it is that whole incarceration issue, right? And the war on drugs, and you know, the building of prisons, and the attack on our education, particularly right here in California, right during the 1990s. Those of you that remember all those propositions that were passed, literally that were voted on and then that were adopted, beginning with 184 and 187, ending the decade with Prop 21, right? The criminalization of our youth, the mass incarceration, you know, demon, you know, the 25 maximum sentence that were mandatory, you know, for Prop 184, the attacks against the bilingual education and affirmative action, you know, all of those within a decade right here in California. And it spurred a huge movement, right? A lot of us in my generation were part of the activities that were trying to counter those things. But I mean, that wasn't Ronald Reagan, but that was Ronald Reagan policies, right? That's why, you know, the 11th administration of Ronald Reagan is like, and they get worse actually than Ronald Reagan. We thought Ronald Reagan was bad, you know, at that time, and they didn't get any better, you know. Bill Clinton was like, you know, Ronald Reagan, you know, he seemed like almost the same exact thing, you know, and he was a Democrat. So it just kind of like spiraled out of the whole political scene for me, just kind of spiraled out of control. So I don't know who to vote for. Who the hell am I going to vote? Why should I vote, right? And all this voting, Southwestern Voter Education Project in the 90s, pushing all of us to vote. But who's there to vote for? Who's there to really advocate for our communities, right? And that was one of the things that just kind of like stood out to me in that, right?
So I mean, when I look at the American presidencies, right, I look at maybe George Washington, James Buchanan. These are the slave driving presidents, right? Then from Lincoln to maybe about Hoover, you have like the railway robber baron presidencies, and then from Roosevelt to Carter, or maybe even Ford. Maybe it really might begin with Carter, not Reagan, but and Reagan definitely expanded. You have basically the American expanding economy presidencies, right? And then from like Carter / Reagan on, you have the decline of the American empire presidencies. You have the decline of industry. You have the deindustrial presidencies. So even if you think that one person seems nice and one person seems like just horrible, or whatever the personalities may be, they're all going to enact a certain policy that belongs to the era to which they belong. So whatever they may seem, like the slave driving presidencies are going to promote that. However they may seem, the railroad, Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt presidencies, they're all going to promote that way of life. And then the American prosperity ones. I mean, if in many economic policies, Richard Nixon was to the left of Barack Obama. Richard Nixon's to the left of Biden, of anything. I mean, now does that mean that Nixon wasn't a fascist and all kinds of horrible things? Of course. Was Nixon more bloodthirsty than maybe some of these presidencies that came after Reagan? Probably. But that doesn't really matter. What matters is the period of history they belong to and the demands of the demands that existed outside of them that they were a part of. So you can really periodize these things, and these things are really periodized by the changing of the shifts of technologies and the economy, and just the way in which the workers related to industry, the way workers related to capital. I mean, we're looking at, since the 1980s, really the invention. It was really with the application of the microchip to industry, this whole automated services, and this process of automation. We'll talk about the robots are going to take one day. The robots are going to take all the jobs. The robots have been taking all the jobs. They have been my entire life. For most of the people here, most of all your lives, they have been. It's been a process that's been happening, and it's going to keep happening. This thing's not going to turn around. It's not going to get better. It's going to get worse and worse and worse. Opportunities become more scarce, more scarce, more scarce, until we have a completely different economy. But this process that began in the late mid-1970s is not going to take care of itself. There's a reason why, they say people born in the 80s were the first generation not to do as well as their parents. And it's gotten worse and worse and worse. Things were bad for Generation X, and they were called slackers. They're blamed for it, right? Things are even worse for the millennials, and things are even worse for whatever's going to follow for Gen Y or Gen Z, and things are going to be even worse for whatever follows Gen Z. This process is not going to reverse itself. So that's the situation we're in. And whether the president's a nice guy, whether he's affable, whether he kicks a soccer ball, whether he can whether he knows how to tweet, whether he's a mean tweeter, or whether he's a funny YouTuber, or whether the next president knows how to use TikTok. That's not really going to change the policies, because these are, if Lincoln was a railway president, these are all microchip presidents. These are all Silicon Valley presidents at this point. They're going to do whatever Elon Musk and the Google guys, whatever they want, those people will get. These are cryptocurrency presidency. I mean, cryptocurrency can only rise because we have a derivative market. And people don't understand what the derivative market is. The derivative market is like 12 times the size of the gross world product, meaning there is more bets on money than there is stuff in the world. I mean, capitalism should have ended like 15 years ago. Should have collapsed like 15 years ago. It's hyped up and propped up on things that don't even exist. It's a skyscraper with a foundation of toothpicks. Yeah.
It gets pretty frightening when you actually see the gargantuan sums of money, or wealth that's being played with, and when you actually see that, you realize, like what he's saying, it's not going to change because there's too much money involved, right? For those people that have that kind of control, that kind of power, it's not going to change, right? So it does get pretty. It can freak you out a little bit when you start looking at that type of, at that scale, But that doesn't mean that things cannot change, right? Doesn't mean that nothing can be done. Right? So let's get into partying.
Some say it begins from within, some say it has already begun, some say wait upon conditions, some say inevitable, some say impossible, some say it is a process, not an event, some carry signs, some sign petitions, some block politicians, some back politicians, some become politicians, and I have seen academics, metaphysics swallow reality, then spit back a peer-reviewed tenure-track salary. And I have seen the organizers of labor embrace the parties of capital. And I have seen age-old cowardice, dishonesty, careerism parade as groundbreakingly new. And I have seen courage burst into spontaneous flame. And I've seen fear in the pig's eye. And I've seen rebellions light the night sky, then fade to smoke. Some speak against the need for political education. Some speak against the need for party structure and discipline, but I know without theory, history does not move. And I know that once the line is set, organization is key. That there are decades for the taking to be wrenched from weeks. That we cannot wait upon the impossible, that none can do it alone. That every day we must work to make victory inevitable. That if we wish to see revolution within our lifetimes, we must organize. Organize. Organize.
Organize.
So that poem is about my belief in the necessity of organized struggle and organized, to join a party. If you're not part of a party, get part of an organization. I am part of no organization because I'm a hypocrite. And because I've been ran out of every single organization I've been a part of. But I'm a fellow traveler to many. So, but people should really, in order to get anything done, none can do it alone. And there are actually many members here today of founding, legendary members of La Raza New Party, as well as the national chair of the current national chair of La Raza New Party. So I'm very honored that you're all here. So to the Ayala family, thank you. So can we give a round of applause to that? La Raza New Party. So for those who are not familiar with it, here in Pacoima, they're very active. So I encourage everyone to look into a lot of the work they do. Half of you might have been brought here by him, so I'm just saying this. But for those who are not, check into LRU because they do a lot of great work here in Pacoima, a lot of great political education with a lot of things I was talking about earlier about California history, about the history of the Southwest, history of what many refer to as Aslan. So.
And I wanted to end with that note because that's really where you have to begin is soaking up the knowledge and the skills and the training that you need to move forward on this. In any kind of way, when you're organizing, you have to learn as much as you can, and then start actually getting involved. Start organizing, start doing something. And there are a number of different ways in which you can get involved. I know that La Raza Unida has been having numerous presentations and conferences over this last couple of years that we've been in pandemic. They've done a lot of stuff online. Much of it is actually still recorded, right? You still have those things recorded. So you can go on there and check out and connect in that way. Here at Tiachuchas, man, they've been doing phenomenal work, in this area. I remember when they were over there by the Pizza Hut, right? I used to live right behind them on Dehan when they first started, this has been a dream of many of us here in this area because there were always, these cultural centers, stuff like that, but they were always in LA or in other places, right? We never actually had a space like this here. Nothing that has lasted this long, right? And I remember going to San Fernando and seeing buildings that had murals, and I knew that they had something there at one point, but it was no longer there anymore, but luckily we've had this space for our young people in particular, right? That they can come here and immerse themselves in this kind of critical environment. I think that it's a wonderful opportunity. So I want to thank all of you for coming out this evening. Thank Matt Sedillo for inviting me, allowing me to be part of this presentation, and I want to thank Tiachuchas also for allowing this or having this as well.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say vote for Luis. Let's say Luis for governor.
Luis for governor.
Luis for governor.
Right? Let's make it happen this time around. So,
yeah.
Thank you all. Any questions or comments? Be good to interact if you have anything you guys want to add.
Con permiso, buenas noches.
Buenas
Buenas
noches.
noches. Any questions? All right,
It's
well,
a wrap.
Books. We got books. I'm here. I'm more than happy to sign them.
Excellent books. This one's an excellent book as well. I'm actually teaching both of them in my classes.
I also want to thank you. Before everyone gets up, I want to thank Dr. Maldonado. He was the first person to ever teach me